Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, down through Southeast Asia. But I'll explain more about that. That's one of the topics for this evening. This is how Buddhism spread.
I found that just with the practice, the renunciation come. Understand? When
Which practice?
Of meditation.
Right.
And all this teaching, without renunciation, without without to renounce it, it's happening.
Right. That's why the word renunciation is not accurate.
It's happening that you pay attention more to your the spiritual development, because you see that there is no
exactly. And this is one of the topics for the next session, is there is a particular insight that, well, there are a number of insights, but one in particular that will lead us very well to this renunciation. And of course, that's the insight into suffering. So this is why that second insight is so important, the insight into suffering. Because if we don't have that insight into suffering, we're going to continue to believe that the source of my happiness and suffering is out there. But that insight into suffering will help us to appreciate that not only the source of suffering is not out there, but the source of happiness is not out there. It's within our own mind. Then, having that insight, then we can develop the wish to be free of suffering. So yes. So that is, other insights helpful, but that is the key one. And we're going to look at that insight this evening.
Excellent. I want to ask, you say that the source of suffering is not from the outside, but in order to practice and come to this realization, we need certain circumstances, so we are dependent on our environment. So how does this...
Sure. So therefore, the real question there is to be able to distinguish between causes and conditions. So often we say, that person is the cause of me getting upset. They made me upset. But actually, what is the cause of our agitation or anger is our habit of getting angry. They were a condition for that to arise. So yes, those external conditions which trigger suffering in us, or mental afflictions, are often helpful, because the reality is, if we don't have those triggers and life's sort of floating along okay, there's no motivation to do anything. We go, life's not too bad, it's not fantastic, but it's okay. And so we just sort of float and nothing happens. But usually, and not always, but often the case is, these triggers trigger a lot of mental afflictions and suffering in us, and then we think, well, hang on, can I overcome this? What's going on here? I'm suffering a lot. Where's that coming from? What's the solution? And so often that can be the catalyst for this. And so that's true, is that many people only search in spirituality if they have a lot of suffering in their life. Not always the case, but very often.
But also in cases of extreme pain, people cannot practice.
Correct. So therefore, we often talk about conducive conditions. And as a beginner, to have conducive conditions means not too much of that stuff, because otherwise we just get overwhelmed. So that's why it's said as a beginner, we need to try and surround ourselves with supportive people, the Sangha. Otherwise we get overwhelmed by all of these influences. So get some people around you that are supportive of you so you can start. But then actually, as we develop in the practice, what becomes conducive changes. In fact, if we really start to progress very well, having nice people around us all the time is not the best thing, because we need things to test us a little bit. Because if everyone's nice to us, we may have this illusion, I never get angry anymore. I'm a very patient person. I've fully developed patience. Maybe not. So therefore, actually at the higher levels, we'll actually need to start to search out difficult people to test us. But at our level, no. Rather surround ourselves with supportive people, because otherwise if we're overwhelmed, you're right, we won't be able to, we'll just get overwhelmed. We won't be able to start anything. Okay, one point and then we'll go to the meditation. So we're going to do the Tonglen practice that we did yesterday. So remember, the Tonglen practice is about wanting to take others' suffering and wanting to give happiness to them. And this is a very powerful way of overcoming the selfish, self-cherishing mind. Because the last thing the selfish mind would want to do would be to take on any suffering from anyone, and the last thing the selfish mind would want to do would be to give away any happiness to anyone. So by imagining doing that, we're really crushing, destroying that selfish mind and replacing it with the mind of cherishing others, the mind of loving kindness and compassion. Now, we did this through the visualization of the inner purity of our mind in the centre of our chest. In a more traditional way of presenting this in Tibetan Buddhism, the first part where we take the suffering, using that smoke and dissolving it into the light, a more traditional way is, instead of imagining the light there, what is often presented is, instead of that, imagining your selfish mind as a small black rock in the centre of your chest. And then when you breathe in that smoke, it touches the black rock and they're both destroyed. And of course the symbolism there is that wanting to take suffering is destroying the selfish mind. So that's sort of the more traditional way it's presented. I don't tend to present it that way anymore, because, again, in our modern society, we have this obsessive focus on the negative, and we often do that with cognitive fusion. So the danger with that, and of course that's a valid approach, but the danger there is, because we have this obsessive focus on negative with cognitive fusion, the danger is we focus on that black rock and then we use the smoke just to beat ourselves up because I'm so selfish. And of course that's not the practice, that's cognitive fusion. So to really have a balanced perspective, then what I do is, instead of that black rock of selfishness, we visualize the inner purity of our mind as that white light. And then the black smoke dissolving in the white light. The symbolism there, of course, is that the inner purity of our mind is our inner wisdom, and it's wisdom that dissolves mental afflictions and suffering. So when we do this practice now, if you prefer, or you have learned the black rock and you really like that, then by all means do that approach. But again, it's not about taking the smoke and then holding on to it or punishing ourselves or so forth, because that's all cognitive fusion. And then the second half in the traditional approach is the same. We do the white light sending out the light. Now, of course, the key, and in this practice, to make it more powerful, we do two things. We conjoin it with the breath, and by conjoining it with the breath, we can stay more easily focused. And we do the visualization, because often visualization makes things more powerful. But some people don't like visualization. And so, of course, visualization is not the key thing here. Because actually, we could have very good visualization, but then it just becomes a smoke and light show. And it has no effect on us. So the key point is not whether or not we have good visualization, we have nice looking smoke and nice looking light. That's not important. The important thing is wanting to take suffering, wanting to give happiness. That's the key element. So if you find the visualization's not doing anything for you, leave it out. And just have the aspiration, may you be free of all suffering and its causes, may you be truly well and happy. That is the key. Question?
But it's also cognitive fusion with the pure mind, because I think I can take all the suffering and give the light for them.
In fact, if you understand the white light, that is actually true. But what happens is people do the cognitive fusion with that.
With the pure, yes.
With the pure light.
So
and then they go, I haven't got anything to give. I haven't got any light to give.
No, it's like I have too much light.
Great. Perfect. In fact, what we realise... but what we realise then, and this comes from the wisdom practice, is that is boundless. There's no longer a me here.
That's what I was afraid, because it's boundless. So what am I? Boundless light to bring people?
That's what we're going to discover in the Vipashyana practice. That's why if we do the Vipashyana practice together with this compassion practice, it will enhance it, because we will have a better and better understanding and experience of what's really going on here. But otherwise, if we don't do the wisdom, then it could be, even if we're doing the light, the ego trip. Exactly. That's why we need to make sure that the wisdom is there. Otherwise it can become an ego trip. Of course. But that's compassion without wisdom. That's why we need to do the Vipashyana practice to cut that, to cut it.
When I imagine the smoke, I say to myself, what is the smoke? Like, it's fear, so I take away all her...
Well, again, it depends on who you're doing it with. I mean, if you're doing it with someone you know, and you know they have a particular problem, maybe they have a lot of anxiety, take their anxiety.
So exactly, so when it comes to people that I don't know...
Well, then you know that generally people do have the general mental afflictions, and certainly they have a distorted view of reality, and they probably have some physical suffering, so just guess what they might have. I mean, they will have certainly mental afflictions.
The idea is to really feel it?
No, because then what we do is we punish ourselves, like anxiety. Oh, anxiety. No, I want to take their anxiety away from them. That's the key.
Okay.
I have a deep desire to take that anxiety from them. It's not like I have to experience anxiety. No, that's not the practice. That's cognitive fusion.
Because I find when I kind of start to judge people. Like,
Judge?
Yes. Like, let's say my mother. She has too much this, so I take it.
Well, that's right. I mean, but I don't think you're judging, you're evaluating.
Yeah.
So we need to evaluate. No, I mean, judging people is bad person. That's judging. That's cognitive fusion. We need to evaluate people's behaviour and so forth.
Like I'm trying to fix her, like something.
No, not fix.
Wrong with her.
Okay, here's the question. This was coming after meditation, but bring it in now. Who benefits from this practice? Your mother or you?
Me.
You. And indirectly your mother. Directly you and indirectly your mother, because the direct benefit is you, because you're releasing your selfishness, you're increasing loving kindness, compassion. So you're the main beneficiary of this practice, but then indirectly your mother is benefiting, because then if you do this practice and then you interact with your mother, you're less likely to be selfish and more likely to be compassionate and helping your mother in a better way. So both people benefit, but you are the direct beneficiary of this practice.
It can relate to what you said, but when I did come Glen here, I didn't relate to it much, and I felt that it's because, in a way, I thought I should, in a way, suffer. Now, the reasoning behind this was that if I don't suffer, then anyone. I mean, it's not very special. Of course, I want people not to have suffering, but then. It's not like I'm taking on myself the suffering, it's just taking it and putting it, somewhere else.
You're not putting it somewhere else, you're putting it here.
Yeah, but So what difference does it make?
The difference is that you are taking it. If you put it somewhere else, the selfish mind is happy to do that. I'll take your suffering and put it on them. Selfish mind goes, yes, let's do that. Let's do that. I can do that all day long. No problem.
No, but there's
In fact, I'll put it on people I don't like.
no, but I mean,
But if you're directing it to yourself,
yeah.
then the selfish mind goes, ooh, hang on, what are you doing here? I don't want any of that stuff.
Is there a way I could relate to it more in the sense that because I didn't really understand, I think I didn't really understand what's the inner purity of the mind.
Yeah, but again, the key is just wanting to take the suffering from them and wanting to give that space to them. That's the key. And of course, what we don't do is hold on to that suffering and punish ourselves. That's cognitive fusion. That's not the practice. So we're not somehow experiencing their suffering. We need to suffer.
But I think there's something there that doesn't connect with me anymore.
Right.
I mean,
But if you see...
I want to take it, okay, but then it goes somewhere. It goes into me, but it has no effect on me
Because you're not really wanting to take it. It's just a visualization.
Okay.
So you really need to want to take it from it.
So in my opinion,
But not to hold on to it. We're not holding on to it. We're dissolving it.
in my opinion, if I really want to make it real for me, then I really have to not to feel it in the sense of making myself.
But yes, you need to relate to it. You need to have empathy, yes.
Yeah, I mean, to
Without empathy, then it won't work. Yeah, exactly.
Alright.
Yeah. So, but don't. Yeah. So yes, that can make it because you're connecting with someone's suffering. Then the empathy is important. Otherwise, it's just a smoke and light show. And then, of course, it won't have any effect. Of course. So we really need to connect and resonate with that suffering and see they're really suffering.
Yeah.
That's key.
I wanted to say something. It's connected to what you were talking about, and also then you. I just wanted to say that for me, the first part of this, the self-compassion, is very balancing to both these problems that I experience a lot as well, like being condescending, or because I start from acknowledging my own suffering, and then I can see it in others, and I can,
Exactly. That's why we're starting with ourselves first, is so that we have a good basis, that we are kind and compassionate, because then this process, I think, will work better. Because if we have low self-esteem and we're trying to take someone's suffering, I think that's not going to work for it. We'll probably hold on to it and go, yeah, I really deserve it because I'm really bad. Or we're disconnected even with our own, and then it's just smoke and light, and you don't feel anything. Then we need to repeat the practice, yeah.
I was wondering if you say, like, instead of wanting to take the suffering, I would say willing to take the suffering.
Willing what?
Because one thing is like something this, I don't know, I was just wondering because
Yeah, willing to take the suffering?
yeah, because also for me it was that question that came up again and again regarding to the own man. Because it's that this cognitive fusion that is really, really confusing for people. And then like when you're saying that I'm willing to be able to help you take
away your suffering. Yeah.
Yeah. And then even if it means that maybe I would, I don't know, I think about, remember the Buddha that goes to the garden and he goes to the hell realms in order to help other beings. It's the ultimate bodhicitta in a way, right? But he's willing to go to hell realms and suffer there, but to help other people, other beings. So I was wondering if we can, maybe this sort of semantics can maybe make it a bit more clear.
Sure.
Because I guess one thing is more like
Holding on to it.
yeah, and willingness maybe.
Yeah, we can use that word.
But still, you need to be able to, I guess, say I will, do that.
Yeah.
I guess.
Sure. Okay, let's do that practice, yeah.
Just another, because I can relate to it because I also found it difficult. I think that it has to do with what you said about empathy and burnout. So that you feel like if you're taking somebody's suffering
if you hold on to it.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's like thinking about it, taking it, but immediately it's transformed into something else. So the minute you can see it transforming into something else, into compassion, into love, then it really helps it to loosen and
That's right, and that's why the symbolism of light, it gets dissolved in that light of wisdom.
otherwise
Compassion.
it gets burnout.
Sure, sure. Okay, let's do that practice. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. And simply becoming aware of the sensations of the breath. We can begin by imagining the inner purity of our mind, our inner wisdom, our inner compassion, in the form of a small white radiant sphere of light in the centre of our chest at the level of our heart. And arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if I were free of suffering and its causes. May I be free of all suffering and its causes. May I be free of all mental afflictions. And bring to mind one mental affliction that you would really like to reduce and eliminate. And imagine that in the form of black smoke filling your body. And with each in-breath, imagine drawing that black smoke into the sphere of light at your heart, completely dissolving it there. So with each in-breath, breathe in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing this mental affliction at your heart, dissolving it into your inner wisdom, inner purity. And imagine the black cloud is now completely extinguished. And now you're completely free of that mental affliction. And rest in that freedom. Rest in that purity. And then arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if I had happiness in its causes. May I be truly well and happy. And then bring to mind one positive quality that you'd really like to cultivate and fully possess. And with each out-breath, imagine rays of light radiating out from the sphere of light at your heart, filling your body and mind, and transforming